Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for Simba Events for inviting me here. That's really a great privilege to be with you all in Shanghai. I would like to share with you the story behind the launch of a really game-changing product, which is still at an early stage in the Chinese market, but really an amazing experience. And quite frankly, it's quite an achievement in the spirits industry, because if you think about innovation, usually for consumer, what the newest is the better. If you think about technology, if you think about cars, if you think about cosmetic products, the new product is always perceived as a better product. Actually, in the spirits industry, when you can say to consumers that the formula and the product is unchanged since 1862, for instance, that's probably the very best claim you can have for a consumer. So they value authenticity, they value tradition, they value heritage. So it's not that easy to innovate, and it's not that easy to change the game, because everything has been invented more or less 400 years ago. If you think about whiskey, vodka, tequila, rum, cognac, all that kind of stuff has been existing for years and years and years. So to give you a little bit of context, this is about obviously the Chinese market, and you very well know the Baijiu and the Baijiu consumption change. What you might not know is actually it's a huge spirits market, but the market share of Baijiu is absolutely enormous. It's 95% of the market in China is Baijiu consumption. And I don't think there is any single country in the world where you have a locally produced spirit that's getting that level of share. So it's massive. Obviously very large, very segmented, a lot of brands, but a massive business. When it comes to the big players in the spirit industry, you might know Bacardi, you might know Diageo, you might know Pernod Ricard, the big guys. Obviously they were very, very attracted by the Chinese market. But the only thing they could achieve after so many years of investment at the end of the day is just all of them fighting for getting a share of a tiny 5% only of this big spirits market in China. So imagine the big guys, the Johnny Walker, Chivas, Valentine's, Hennessy, Remy. They make a lot of noise, they spend millions of dollars, but at the end of the day, they only own 5% of the spirits market in China. And the way they've done that is a typically Western multinational approach of business when it comes to China, at least in the past years, which is I take my Western products and I basically push them to the East. And I don't change anything on them. I just consider they are the best, and I push them and I sell them, and are imported products. That works, but that delivers 5%. When it comes to Bacardi, the main issue there was as the third player in the global spirits industry, we were not very, very successful in China. And I would say we are not still very successful in the Chinese market. And the reason for that is that we were very late in the game, and the place and the market share was already taken by these brands that I've mentioned previously. And second, on top of that, we had a gap in our portfolio, because precisely cognac and whiskey were the two categories where we hadn't any very, very strong brands. So we are coming late, and on top of that, we don't have the right products in the portfolio. It's a very tough situation. And when you're in such a tough situation, you don't have many potential strategies, and probably you've nothing to lose trying to go for a game-changing innovation. Either you change the game or you lose the game. And this is better highlighted by this, and you might be familiar to this theory of the red ocean strategy and blue ocean strategy. The red ocean strategy, which by the way we followed during some years, would have been, let's go for the fight in whiskey and cognac. But actually, if you do that, in the spirits industry, you've got two key drivers of success, because it's products which are selling image, and it's products which are very often consumed out of home. So the key driver of success is you need distribution, and the second key of success, you need to advertise your brand so that you create a very attractive image for the consumer. Now, if you go in whiskey and cognac, you will always be outspent by the key players. They are 10 times your size, so they can spend on advertising. So you're absolutely irrelevant and you're absolutely invisible unless you spend upfront an enormous amount of money. And second, your access to distribution is going to be extremely complex because you can lock exclusive deals with the channels, so your product will not be available. So it's really a tough situation. Now, the path we've chosen after many years of, I would say, unsuccessful tries to establish a footprint in the Chinese market was to go for a blue ocean strategy. And was to say, well, if all the big guys are looking for 5%, let's go for 95%. Obviously, that's a little bit of a caricature, but that's fairly audacious to say, well, let's change the rules of the game. Let's do what the others are not doing. So let's think about Baijiu. Let's think about the meal occasion, because Baijiu is a very different type of spirit and very differently consumed. And let's see whether, and we don't have any Baijiu in our portfolio, let's see whether we can do something about that and understand better the consumer. The first step was to move into segmentation, obviously, when you consider a massive market of 95%. And we could identify a fairly interesting target, which we call the progressive premium drinker, which had the characteristic of being very much onto a few trends like premiumization, which was a kind of drinker that is already having a personal consumption that is outweighing the business-related consumption. A consumer that is already switching to more fashionable spirits, and finally a consumer that has more sophisticated dining trend and whatever the situation of dining is. So a consumer that is aged between 30 and 40 and already receptive to all kind of brands and consuming Baijiu, but already also consuming Western brands. What we then did with these consumers and this specific target was going in deep into the understanding of the consumption and actually trying to understand why the market was that way. And what we could see is that Baijiu was extremely strong and well received by these consumers because it was a long-standing cultural heritage, absolutely perfectly well fitting the meal occasion because the food pairing of Baijiu with the Chinese food is absolutely seen as perfect by most consumers. The unique smoothness and fragrance of the product. But Baijiu had two weaknesses. One is the perception, and not only the perception, the fact that it's not really a healthy product, and I would say alcohol obviously is never healthy. We all know that. But Baijiu was really perceived as a strong product, not that healthy. And second, a very high alcohol content. In exchange, and that probably explains why the Western spirits are only 5%, they are very strong on what they deliver in terms of progressive image to the consumers, but they are mainly bar-driven occasion, and according to the consumers we were studying in detail, they do not pair well with food. They are actually awful tasting when you pair that with food, so they don't fit with the meal, and the meal is the biggest alcohol consumption occasion in China. So we could really unlock what we call the core consumer insight, which was that there is a big unmet need there. If we can crack a product that is able to pair well with food, to be suitable for the meal occasion, but at the same time which is perceived as much more healthy and lower in alcohol than Baijiu, there is a niche there. There is something we can start with. Obviously, we had no idea of the product we would create there, but that was the insight that there is an unmet need there, especially for women, by the way, but not only for women. And we needed to create a product that would be at the same time culturally relevant, because we knew it was very important, but also progressive in its image. We needed to do something perceptually that was better for me, and finally pairing very well with food that is consumed in China. So we moved into ideation. Ideation is a big one, and when you work in innovation, that's probably one of the most difficult things if you look for a game changer. What is easy to do is line extension. What is easy to do is flavoring products, for instance, in our industry, or aging products. Getting to really new ideas is a difficult process. What usually company would do is typically internal brainstormings, and you would be very disappointed by internal brainstorming. Internal brainstorming usually produce, it's like a writer in front of a blank sheet of paper on the day he feels he's not really able to write. Because you force people at the point of time to find new ideas. Usually you vote with post-it notes at the end of the exercise, and you end up with things that are really, I would say, in a daring language, a little bit crap. And you think that is a little bit not very striking. You go to the common ideas. Another way to create ideas is you do co-creation with consumers. Unfortunately, and that's not from me, that's from Henry Ford, but if you ask for a consumer to replace a horse, he will go for a faster horse. There is no way a consumer will tell you the story of building a car. So that was also very disappointing. The other technique is to go to innovation agencies. There are many, many available in the world, and once again, they're super expensive. And the level of quality of ideas they are delivering is often a little bit disappointing. So we had, based on that experience, we had to create our own internal process of getting to breakthrough ideas. The way we did that is, because if you want to get lucky, you don't get lucky by luck. You get lucky because you create the conditions for luck. That's what we call luck is an attitude. And what do I mean by that is, you need to create, and we created an innovation community made of marketing people, R&D people, consumer insight people, a group of nearly 50 people. You make sure that these people have permanently, very clear in the back of their minds, the top 10 challenges they need to crack. Your top 10 innovation bricks. And then get that in mind. They sleep with that in the back of their mind. And then you over-inform permanently these people. You make these people attend fairs, you make these people attend forums like this one, you make people meet suppliers, which are a big source of innovation. You make sure that whatever the subject, and most of the time not directly related to a typical subject you're following, but you feed the brain permanently of these people with information, so that all this information stands at the forefront of their mind. And then you create the physical conditions for the back of the mind to connect with the front of the mind. And we were getting all these people 3 days every month and a half together, these 50 people, in workshops all over the world, having sessions of brainstormings, creations, tastings, suppliers visit information. And that's the way we probably got to, I would say, more than 80% of the ideas of new product that we launched. When we were mentioning earlier that we launched 20 new products in 5 years, 15 of them came from this internal ideation process made that way. And that's exactly what happened with this project. And the aha moment on this product was, and I remember as if, well, yesterday it was a presentation on nanotechnology, so it's a fairly dry subject for marketeers. And as you would expect, during a presentation on nanotechnologies, half of the marketeers and marketing people in the room was half sleeping, quite logically. But the presenter was an expert on nanotechnology. At one point of time in the speech was saying, and thanks to this process and this technology, blah, blah, you could one day distill petal of roses, you could distill tea leaves, you could distill blah, 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 blah. And thanks God there was a marketing people in the room who had the back in mind that he needed to crack something for the Chinese market to go against Baijiu. And he jumped on and said, wait a second, you said you can distill tea leaves. That's a big idea. And that's the way it was created. Just, yes, by accident, by luck, but the conditions for luck were created during this with this process. Tea, needless to explain what tea means for you. You are the expert at tea. Tea is the most consumed beverage in the world after water. Tea is just magic. Tea is enormous. Tea, when we thought about the tea distilled spirit, we thought, well, we've touched gold, there's gold there. Now, there were a few challenges, and quite big ones. The first one, which is on this page, the last one, and which is probably the biggest one, is, yes, it's a good idea, but the reason why it doesn't exist already is because it is impossible. You cannot distill tea leaves. It's not because nobody has thought about it, it's because it is physically impossible. So usually that's a killer of a good idea. The second challenge was, let's make it culturally relevant. Let's make sure that we're going to deliver something that is relevant to the consumer. I think it's a nice link with the presentation of Lin Shu right before. Then another challenge was, let's deal with our internal post-process and innovation process, because we are really stepping into a world that we absolutely ignore, and we have no idea of what it might cost and what it might deliver. So we are really in the unknown, and our financial process might not allow the unknown. And finally, let's deal with differentiation, because if you are really creating something very new, and if you think about the spirits industry, think about the number of bottles you can see on the shelf. Everything has been almost created. You have all forms and shapes of bottles available, and it's very difficult to stand out there. And if you create something different, it has to look very different. So how do you make sure you will have enough differentiation to be noticed by the consumer? Starting with the relevance. The point here was, we knew that we needed to be culturally relevant, but at the same time we needed to be progressive for the consumer. And the two possible approaches were, one, you do a Western product, like cognac, right? So you produce outside China, you do a typically Western product, and you export it to China, and for China it's an imported product. You're going to have the progressive side of it, but you won't have the cultural relevance. On the other side, if you do a 100% Chinese product, you're going to be culturally relevant. You won't have the progressive side, but on the top of that, there is a strong defiance of Chinese consumer on the potential quality of what you're producing here as far as spirits are concerned, especially stepping into new territories. And there is doubts on food safety and doubts on quality. It was very well expressed by a few consumers. So the solution we created was to go halfway and to say, well, let's use the know-how, the savoir-faire of the French people, especially in the area of cognac, to do the production of this complex product. But at the same time, let's be sure that for a tea spirit, we use the absolute best tea in the world, which is a Chinese ingredient, which is Chinese green tea leaves. And then we can match the Chinese provenance of tea with the French savoir-faire on the production. That's what we call East meet West, instead of typically pushing a Western product to the East. The next challenge on differentiation was, obviously, if you want to create a new bottle and you go to your usual packaging agencies, there are very good packaging agencies in the world for designing bottles, but you are pretty much sure to get a little bit more of the same. You're pretty much sure to get a little bit of differentiation, but not as much as you would like to. And so it took us a while to figure out how can we manage that. And the thinking was, okay, you have two parts, but the bottle is super important, and the bottle is 3D design. And who's the best in the world in creating special shapes of bottles? It's obviously the perfume industry. If you think about the elaboration, the sophistication of the perfume industry and the perfume bottles, it's just outstanding. So we discovered, and I think you're going to be amazed to hear that all these bottles that you see here, which most of them are super famous, and you could share them in duty-free stores, all these ones are being created by one single guy. It's not 10 companies there, it's one guy. It's a freelance guy in the center of Paris, working with a couple of other people, not making a lot of noise, but he's a super designer of perfume bottles. So we worked with him, which no one had done in the spirits industry, and we gave him the brief of create something that is just super differentiated, unbelievable, that will give justice to a tea spirit. And he created that bottle. At the first sketch, he created a bottle that has absolutely no symmetry, and you will see it better on that picture. It's a fascinating bottle, and if you've seen it before, and if you see it where it is being sold, it creates a fascination because when you look around and you walk around the bottle, depending on where you stand, you will see it differently. And it's so captivating that you will need to touch it, and you will need to try to understand this impact that it has because it's not symmetrical, it's a twisted bottom, which, by the way, in the glass industry, when we came with that kind of design, you can imagine the reaction of the glass industry for making that bottom. So it took a little bit of time also to convince them. Moving to the next challenge we were facing, it's a typical multinational or big company process challenge. With usually, when you deal with innovation, you've got your concept, you've tested it with consumers, and you know that that's the kind of value I'm going to deliver to the consumer. I'm going to create a premium spirit that's going to compete against that kind of brands. Therefore, I'm going to price it that way. Then I'm going to need my margin, the typical margin I need for my company. Therefore, the cost of goods I need to achieve is that one. And that's your cost of goods target. And I guess if you're working in innovation, most of you are working exactly that way. You start the development with the cost of goods target. If we had done that, this would have never existed. Because this would have killed the project. We had absolutely no idea of where the cost would land. So doing that, immediately after starting, someone would have checked and said, you're so far away from your target that the project is dead. So actually what we got was the ability to change our internal process. On that specific project, let's work differently. Let's see, where do we land with the cost of goods by the time we're developing and getting a better knowledge of whether we can do it, and let's see where we land. Based on that, we know the margin we need to make. Based on that, that's going to define a retail selling price. Based on that, let's see whether the value we deliver to the consumer is justifying that price. So it's a very different way of approaching it. And if the answer is no, it doesn't deliver the value, you have two options. You optimize your cost of goods upward or downward. But it's amazing because we would think all of us, it's going to be obviously downward. And actually what happened was the opposite. We discovered that with that kind of packaging, with that kind of concept, we were having a very high cost of goods, but actually the perception was much stronger than what the perception of value by the consumer, which was allowing us to give a little bit more cost of goods in that and say, okay, let's put more in the pack. We have a nice pack, but let's put more in the better cap, something that's even more premium, because we're going to be able to charge more because so that flexibility, you couldn't have it in a normal cost process. Finally, probably the most complicated challenge was a technical challenge. Why that? So I said before, a tea spirit cannot exist because you cannot distill tea. I won't give you too much boring information, technical and scientific details on that, but you have to know that the production of alcohol actually is something fairly simple. You get raw material contains sugar, therefore you can ferment, that gives often wine or beer. And then you can distill. Distill is about boiling, you get evaporation, you get back the drops of evaporation, and that's basically alcohol and spirit. But the very first point is you need a raw material that has sugar, and tea leaves have no sugar in it. So again, the way we approach that needed to be very different, because if you stick with your internal R&D and you're in territory that looks impossible, usually after thinking of it a couple of months, the project's going to be dead. Say, well, this is impossible. Now, companies are fairly, especially big multinational, but less and less. But until recently, big multinational are fairly against opening their books and opening their programs and opening their strategy to others. And the need for confidentiality is absolutely enormous. It's an economic war, and you don't want to release that. Now, the world is changing, and now I really realize that you might have in a part of the world, in a category that has nothing to do in a transversal and lateral thinking, someone who has cracked something in terms of R&D or technical complexity that might serve your industry, that is not related to the industry that might serve, which is open innovation. So before killing the project, and our scientists were convinced that it was really potentially possible, but very, very difficult, and definitely we couldn't do it ourselves. So we decided to partner with American universities, with American research centers, and to tea processing experts like Amelia Bay, and to big distilling companies like Greenfield or like Blue Ridge. And the luck we could have, and that's a clear demonstration of what open innovation can bring to you, is that if you remember that story, it was at the time of the Bush administration, George Bush administration. The oil price was extremely high. And the big thing was about producing bioethanol. Bioethanol being a potential substitute to the gasoline we are using, that is using oil. The problem is we can do bioethanol, but we would do that with raw material that is used for feeding the planet. You can produce bioethanol with cereals, you can produce bioethanol with sugarcane. But if you substitute your gasoline by that, suddenly everybody's going to starve on the planet. So the Bush administration wanted to have a substitute for that, and they funded enormous research program to create bioethanol with tree leaves, with grass, with anything that might drive us to production of bioethanol, but that is not used in the food industry, the food production. And they cracked a few things, and what we could discover by working with them is that actually the tea plant, but like other plants, so it's not specific to tea, actually contains cellulose that can be broken into fermentable sugar. So it's a very complex process, but it's a big summary. But basically, you don't have sugar in the tea leaf, but you have something that after treatment can be transformed into something that can become something that is fermentable. And that was the very beginning of the production process. Obviously, it took something like 3 years to crack it. Why that? Because the yield was very excessive. It was like 10 kilos of teas for one bottle, so it's not really achievable. The other thing is that I can guarantee you that the very first time you try something, that was very exciting. We had the first tea spirit on the planet one day. You know, that amount of liquid, not much more, and that was undrinkable. You know, the first batch was undrinkable. That was horrible. But we were so excited because finally that was existing. So then you refine your process and you work on it. It took 3 years. 3 years to land on this, which is Tang, named after your famous dynasty that popularized the consumption of tea in China. This product has been launched very, very selectively at a very high price. You see it's nearly 2,000 RMB. It has been launched only in the duty-free store of Hong Kong Airport on purpose. Inchu was mentioning that the breakthrough and the game-changing innovation is something that's going to be enduring and last for long. In the spirits industry, seeding is very important in order to create all the attributes you need in order to create scarcities with strategy, so that there is desire for products, especially premium products. So very high price. And this has been extremely well received by, I would say, all the innovation community, both journals. So it's been multi-awarded. But what is really remarkable, and that's why we can call it a game-changing. Now, it's as I was mentioning at the beginning, it's nearly 400 years that a new spirit category had not been invented. So it's quite a remarkable achievement. Now, what we don't know, we know that it is a game changer, but we still don't know whether it will be able to change the game. But definitely that's something that is out of the current norms of what's being done in the spirits industry. And that's it for me, and I would be very happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the sharing. First of all, I would say it's really a beautiful product, very eye-catching. And I'm very interested in the process you described about how to do the innovations, how to let the panel of innovation internal team to stick on it. I remember the framework you said challenge, information, and also conditions. Sorry, it's a very specific question. So when you define the challenges and throw it to the internal innovation team, so does the challenge include all the aspects of the total company or the business with phase 2, or is very specifically about what type of ideas and what that the team need to come up with. So how you define the challenge and throw it to the team, because I think it's very important to let them sleep on it and come up with solutions. So I would like to understand, when you set the challenge, how you describe the challenge, what's the scope of the challenge, and how you would like the team to come back to the innovation board.
That's a good question, because I think it's at the core of the capability of an innovation team, getting that right. The way you have different ways of building your innovation strategy. Some companies have an innovation strategy which is going to be invention driven. So if you think about companies like L'Oreal, cosmetic industries, very often you've got the labs. They work on molecules and discoveries, and they touch ground on something and they pass it to the marketing team, which figure out what they can do based on what they know the consumer might like. So it's invention-driven strategy. We were not at all in that. We were into strategy-driven innovation, which is on your core brands, strategy first. So you identify what you need really to get growth across the world, across your portfolio. And you might summarize into challenges like, I need to bring more value on that specific brand. It's a brand that is very successful, but not value. Another one, which is on the Martini Vermouth brand, which is huge in Russia, I need to masculinize my brand. And that's the potential for growth. Which might be in China, I need to establish a footprint going against Baijiu at the middle occasion. So once very upfront you've defined for a total company, what are your key strategic challenges where innovation might be an answer? It's not the only answer. When you want to premiumize a brand, communication will play a role, but definitely launching a more premium product will help you in that direction. So when your key strategic challenges are very clear and very well defined, that's the one we put in the back of the mind of our innovators. And as you very well mentioned, this way of approaching ideation is based on very easy common insight that we have all experienced, is that very often your best ideas, your best thoughts are coming up when you are taking a shower or when you're driving your car. Not necessarily when you are at your desk with a blank page or a screen of computer and you need to find the solution in 5 minutes or 1 hour. So it is absolutely, for us, it was absolutely key to make sure that it's like the police when they look for the 10 more wanted people. It's 10 more wanted people, it's not 100. Because they need the police department to focus on 10 people and they know their face and they will. And that helps. And that's the way you catch them. For us, that was the 10 most wanted ideas. Because that was the 10 big challenges for the company. And the good thing is that if you do that, and all your innovation community is aware of that, it's a teamwork, because you don't have the guy in charge of this Baijiu thing for China being the only one to think about it. Next to him you have someone who's working in the American market, but he might find the idea. He might be the one jumping during the meeting saying, you said that applies to that, because I know that. So it's a dynamic that is time consuming, because obviously from day one you won't start getting great ideas, but on the long run, I think it's what gave us this 80% of the great ideas we had were produced internally by this innovation community. And our rate of success on 20 new products was 50%. 10 of them were big successes for the company. I would say half of the rest was unproven successes, and I would put Tom, for instance, in the unproven successes, and 25% were failures. So it's a fairly high rate of success due to that, because you're people who are really inside the company, knowing everything, but very exposed to a lot of things, and living that in the back of their mind.
So what's the drinking experience? Is it baijiu or cognac?
It's a good question, because I should have mentioned it, so it's a good opportunity. It's a baijiu type of consumption, so it's typically a product that is meant to be drunk at ambient temperature during the meal occasion. It's a product that is still fairly high in alcohol. I mentioned that baijiu was high in alcohol and was one of the concerns, but actually we couldn't deliver a great product with the smoothness we were after without having 40% alcohol content. So a little bit like the whiskeys of the cognac. But it's definitely a Baijiu experience style. It's a meal occasion, super premium product, ambient temperature, neat on a small glass. And that's really amazing. It's delicious. That's really you feel the green tea. There is no doubt. What happened a little bit by accident is the product is so fragrant that when you open the bottle, if I had been opening a bottle right here, probably half of the room would smell it. It's amazing. And aroma is a big part of the game in the alcohol industry. So you will feel the aroma.